Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to the 1085 Ground Podcast. I am your host, Anthony Joki. Jack McCurry isn't with me tonight, but I do have a special guest today. He is Mike Krupka. He is one of the hosts of the Nothing But the Dogs podcast. He is also a contributor at Dogs by Nature. How are you doing today, Mike?
How's it, Anthony? I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. How are you doing today?
I'm just kind of hanging in there. I guess if there was one place I would like to be stuck in during quarantine, it'd be where you live. But
Right.
it was 68 degrees today, which has been a little bit warmer than what it has been recently. So I guess I can't complain too much.
Yeah, that's balmy for this time of the year. That's nice.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that we could get some golf weather back soon because kind of the crappy weather has kind of thrown a wrench into our league so far, and especially with everything else going on too. But I'm hoping that we can kind of get back to some golf, and so that's the one thing every week that I enjoy during the summer is getting out golfing with my dad, and hopefully we can get back to that soon.
Heck yeah, man. Where's your go-to course before we dive into football? Because I'm a big golf fan. I don't do it enough, but I love golfing, and I recall a lot of the courses back home. So where's your go-to?
We our league is at Painesville Country Club, um,
Ah, nice.
which is about 10 minutes away from us. So that's a really nice course. We actually joined Quail Hollow last year. They had a special membership going on, so we joined that. It's a beautiful place to play. A lot of the other courses that I used to like to play shut down. I used to learn out at Pepper Ridge and Madison. I enjoy playing out there. Um, Fairway Pines is another one that closed. Casement Golf Course also closed, but it was kind of tough for some of those golf courses. But um, thankfully, there's still one near or a couple nearby that we get to quite often. So back home, do you have a favorite one that you used to always frequent?
I grew up on the west side, and back when I was just a young lad, we used to belong to the Spring Valley Country Club. And I remember getting my first golf lessons out there. Obviously, very lucky to have been in that position, but got my first golf lessons out there when I was like 10 or 11. So I really liked that course. We only were there for a year or so, but then it's just a lot of courses started to pop up. I mean, some of the old faithful ones are like Pine Hills. You've got Hinkley Hills. And what else? There was Redtail out in Avon that I like to go to from time to time, and even Sweetbriar since they've redone that whole legacy back. Well, I think it's 18 now they've converted it to. So when I go back home, I try to play when it's in the summer. It's very rare that I'm in there in the summer, but those are some of the courses that I recall from, what seems like a long time ago now.
I played quite a few. I was on a golf team back in high school, and so we would travel all over, kind of Northeast Ohio here, and play a lot of different courses. And I really need to get back to that. I know we kind of get stuck in the rut of playing the league every week, but it's kind of nice to get out there and try a different course every once in a while, just to throw a little different challenge at you because it can get a little mundane, I guess, playing the same nine every week or every other week, since we rotate front and back nine. But
Sure.
we want to get you in here today because it actually kind of worked out, because originally the plans we were going to talk a little bit about the fifth year options, and we'll touch on the Njoku a little bit later on. But it turns out today that the Browns re-signed Rashard Higgins to a 1 year, $910,000 contract. He is the first Browns wide receiver drafted since 1999 to get a second contract, which is only 1 year. And I just find that stat completely fascinating. Rashard only caught 4 passes last year. He had the game-winning touchdown against Buffalo, which was the game I was at. His 2 other catches were for first downs. But back in 2019, he ended up catching 39 to 53 targets for 74%, an average of 14.7 yards per reception, and 4 touchdowns. Mike, when you look at what Rashard has been able to do, at least in that late 2018 season, and develop that kind of rapport with Baker Mayfield, how important do you feel that it was for them to bring him back at least for 1 more year?
I think when you look at the wide receiver room and the depth that we have there, it's sort of OBJ, Landry, and then I won't say a cliff, but there's a significant drop off after that. So much like a lot of the other positions on the roster right now, I feel like Andrew Barry and Coach Stefanski, as Stephen Thomas likes to call him, Coach Hottie, as those guys got together and they addressed their plan for the offseason, they obviously want to kind of wedge more talented players in between those gaps. And I think that's exactly what a 1-year deal for Higgins does, is it gives you a guy that, is a security blanket for Baker Mayfield, number one, but number two, he's a veteran and you can trust on him. And I say you can trust him and depend on him in lots of different situations. I think if you're going to use one word to describe Rashard Higgins, I would say it's efficient. So much so that I think, in the 2018 season, he was one of the most efficient pass catchers when you look at average depth of target versus his actual catch percentage. I mean, he was up there with some of the best wide receivers in the league. And again, his market share was only 11% of the offense. So again, this season, I don't expect him to have a massive market share, but when he is targeted, I do expect him to return to that efficiency level that, Baker's comfortable with him. He'll find him in key situations, and he's not fast, but he's going to be able to separate. So when you can depend on that type of receiver and you know where he's going to be and you know he's going to be open, again, you get that kind of that rhythm and that juice and that rapport going. And that's kind of what I look forward to seeing him do this year. And I think it's super important for this offense to have that depth.
With Rashard, do you feel that because it took so long to sign him to a 1-year deal and for him to come back, do you feel that Andrew Barry and company were kind of waiting to see kind of how the draft played out, see if maybe a real talented receiver fell to him? I know they drafted Donovan Peoples-Jones in the 6th round and they signed a couple as UDFAs as well, but do you feel that they were just kind of waiting to see how everything else shook out with the draft before approaching Higgins and wanting him to come back?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question, and I think part of it is yes, and then another part of it is kind of a maybe. And what I mean by that is I absolutely think it's part of their strategy and to wait and see what happened. I think they were probably open to a different wide receiver, in a different position. They must have had their eyes on lots of different players from lots of different position groups. But, I think it just makes sense knowing how they approach things and the analytical team that they have, that they were going to see kind of how the draft played out and then continue what I would say is a discussion with Rashard Higgins. I don't think he signs here in Cleveland if they were sort of non-communicative and shady, if you will, and then all of a sudden after the draft they approach him and say, hey, you want a 1-year deal? Because it turns out, we find out today, that he was offered, or at least per the reports, he turned down other offers to want to be in Cleveland. So that tells me that, number one, again, he likes Baker Mayfield. Number two, he probably likes the city and the team. But number three, that there was a good relationship with the new guard inside Berea, and they're being very, I guess, transparent with him. And so that's just my guess. And when you saw the way things played out, there was a good relationship there. You cross over that bridge and say, hey, come on back over. And he was down for it. So that's.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's kind of nice that there is kind of that sense of transparency. I think that's a good way of doing business with things, with players. You don't know if maybe one of those receivers in the 1st round may have fallen to him, to the Browns, and maybe that 2nd round, kind of like Grant Delpit ended up doing. And maybe at that point you don't bring back Rashard Higgins because then you have one of those really talented receivers that you have a 1st round grade on. Under contract and maybe about 3 times as expensive of a deal than it would be to have Rashard on the team. But, a 1-year, $910,000 contract is kind of a prove-it deal. Who knows? Maybe he could be the guy that is one of the guys that is here long term. I know with everybody else needing extensions soon, with Baker, Chubb, which I don't know if they're going to do that or not, and that's a discussion for another day. But right. They're paying Austin Hooper quite a bit of money. They're paying David Njoku $6 million next season. Obviously, you have Landry and OBJ who have large contracts. So there's a lot, at least on the offensive side. Let's not even talk about defense with Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, who you're gonna have to pay too. So, this kind of 1 year deal, kind of improvement deal, could they could get a lot out of Richard this year, and I think that'll be really interesting to see if that happens or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it's the vet minimum, right? So it's not like you're shelling out a lot of coin for him. And like you mentioned, if some of those other guys jettison out of the program, and you've got to either draft a guy next year or whatnot, Richard could be that sort of consistent, dependable veteran that you keep on the team for the first time in obviously what seems like a long time. You've got a wide receiver, again, who has a rapport and may not be your top playmaker, but again, he's got that relationship with your quarterback, which should translate into production.
Yeah, hopefully it does, and I think it will too. I know Baker trusts him a lot, and we've seen a lot of good things. So hopefully Richard and the Browns, things work out this season. I know last year was a struggle with him and Freddie for whatever reason. I don't know if we'll ever find out the true deal
with everybody.
Yeah, with everybody. It wasn't just Richard; it was everybody. So I guess we'll find out if things progress with him or regress even farther. I don't know how much more it could regress than last season. So hopefully we're progressing. We did mention Donovan Peoples-Jones. The Browns did draft him in the 6th round of this draft. He comes from Michigan. In his 3 years at Michigan, he caught 102 passes out of 177 targets for a 58% catch rate. I know there's a lot of poor quarterback play at Michigan, but he's a guy who has a lot of athletic tools. He can return. What do you think Peoples-Jones is going to bring to the Browns in that receiver room?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it on the podcast summarizing day 3 and the undrafted free agent class with Stephen Thomas earlier this week, that I feel like his instant impact is going to be on special teams. I think in some of his highlights, you can see just how explosive he is. I mean, he ran a 4.4 at his size, and with his explosion, he's going to be kind of a tough guy to bring down in the open field. So right away, that bolsters the special teams unit. And then, Matt Waldman sort of reinforced that, I believe, today on Twitter, essentially saying, you start there with special teams with this guy, and then you just build from that point. I think one of the themes that you saw with this draft is the team bringing on guys in day 3 that are going to be positioned behind really good starters. And this is going to put them in, again, a position to learn and grow as players. I mean, again, I mentioned this with Steven on the day 3 roundup, but think about learning behind OBJ and Jarvis Landry. It's a dream come true for a wide receiver who may have been victim to a terrible system, which when I watched his tape, it was just a really frustrating system to watch how infrequently he was targeted and just, I guess, how he wasn't utilized in the best way, I would say. So now you're going to take that guy who just has raw traits, has some production, has showed you what he can do when he is targeted, and now you're going to put him behind, arguably 2 of the better, if not one of the best route runners in the NFL. So I'm excited to see kind of how much he soaks up and how much he takes on and how quickly. Wide receivers, like I say all the time, typically have a 2-year kind of waiting period until that light bulb goes on. So he's going to come in. He's not going to have a lot of expectations. Whatever you get from him is just going to be just that much better, I should say. So really expect nothing. And then whatever you get is just a bonus. But I think special teams is where he's going to make the most immediate impact. And then, long-term, I see a guy, again, with these traits who you can mold and develop. I mean, there was 2 routes back-to-back versus Ohio State, and I'm not sure who he was playing against in the slot. But, I mean, I wish I had all 22 on the game. But he did what I would consider to be a very savvy move, a very veteran move. And he set up the defender in the slot to the inside, broke outside, had at least 3 yards of separation on an out route past the first down marker. The quarterback didn't throw him the ball, but on the very next play, he baited that same corner to jump to the outside, knowing that he had just been beat to the to the outside, right? So he baited him to the outside, corner jumped to the outside. He cut it back inside for a shallow cross, was wide open, caught the ball, had to do a sliding catch actually behind him to catch the ball because the ball was thrown so far behind him, made the catch. And it's those types of nuances about his route running and his understanding of setting up a defender, albeit sort of a baseline expectation, but you see that in his film. And that gives me, again, an encouraging feeling putting behind those two other receivers in this offense, that he can grow into somebody who can play the X out on the outside, who can be versatile, like I think is another theme that a lot of the players in this year's draft have, that they can be moved around and they can do multiple things with these players in, from play to play. So again, I see him having that upside. And I think it's just an exciting addition to the team so late in the draft. I mean, I don't know how he lasted to pick 187. I mean, if we're going to, have a play on words, the Browns absolutely killed it with that 187 pick.
Yeah, that kind of was the theme throughout the entire draft with all the different guys that they took. And one of the things I had mentioned to Jack at some point last week on a pod, and it might have been when Stephen Thomas was on as well, when I get to day 3, at least my philosophy, I want guys who can come in, they'll be behind whoever else, but I want them to be able to make an impact on special teams. And obviously, Peoples-Jones is one of those guys that could also do that. I think Harrison Bryant, the tight end, will also play special teams, whether that's on punt coverage or whatnot. But I think that, when you get later on in the draft, if you could find those players specifically who could fit into your special team system and then later on develop down the road into a starter or into a useful guy on third down or just some way to include them in the offense, I think that's a really good approach to how things can go.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think getting those guys on day 3 that can contribute is a must. I mean, they can't just have a one-dimensional kind of profile. And again, I think the other little nuance to this season, and it'll be interesting to see how all the teams leverage it, is the additional practice squad spots and then the additional game day roster and full-time roster spots. So there's a little bit more wiggle room for teams to get creative, for the Browns to get creative in how they stack their roster and the options they give their coaches on game day. But I mean, that's a great point that you bring up, especially for day 3, and something I agree with.
You've posted on Twitter a lot of his game film. You've gone through and posted a lot of clips, and you mentioned some of his strengths there. When the amount of film and whatnot that you have watched, what are some of the things that are lacking? What could he do a little bit better? In other terms, what are his weaknesses, quote unquote?
Donovan Peoples-Jones, right?
Yes.
I think in this offense, what I'm going to want to see him improve on, and maybe he just wasn't asked to do it that often, but I didn't see him as a kind of a tenacious blocker or a good blocker. He just sort of went through the motions. So I think that's something that, again, in this offense, especially in the wide zone, whether it's, play action or whatever it is, you're going to want to see him be able to engage down blocks, continue to keep the second out or the outside holes and the outside lanes free for Chubb and whoever else is running the ball. So I want to make sure that we see that from him this coming season, next year. That's going to be an important factor for me. I mean, obviously, his route tree is going to have to be expanded. There's going to be maybe a handful of routes that he's good at or more that he's good at or comfortable with. So he's going to have to work on expanding that based on what he's going to be asked to do in the offense. And just route running in general. I think he's a good hands catcher. I think he has a good idea of how to use his body as a shield. But I think, just being able to be in the right place at the right time and mastering the control that he has of his body, again, to be able to move. And you see it, the growth, and you see how good guys are in the NFL at doing this versus college when you watch the tape. I mean, you watch OBJ run a route, and just the subtle shoulder move, head move, and then all of a sudden he's planning and going the other direction, a microsecond after the defensive back has read that and reacted. And, they're able to capitalize on that within their routes to set the defenders up and stack them. So yeah, that's going to be something that he's going to have to learn, just like every wide receiver coming in to their rookie season. So I think once he puts that all together and begins to get some confidence too, having a quarterback that can put the ball on him, those things are all going to sort of synthesize. And I think, again, that usually takes 1 to 2 years. And when it all comes together, that's when we're going to really see what he can become.
If they were to, if he impresses on special teams and they want to start and include him into the offense, is there one thing that he does really well to where they could maybe game plan 2 or 3 plays around him per game?
Yeah, I think he's probably going to be able to work inside in the slot, but he's also really good at in the X on the outside along the boundary, whether that's on comeback routes or out routes or, just deep 9 routes. He can get behind the defense, but he does a lot of good work on the boundary. So I could see him being utilized in certain situations there. I could see him being utilized in the red zone because, one of his best traits is he's able to, again, to use his big body and his 44-inch vertical to high point the ball and he's able to snag it in the end zone. So I think those things are places and ways that we're going to see him utilized this season if he's asked and earns the chance to get playing time outside of special teams.
The Browns do have a crowded wide receiver room right now. You kind of expect Odell, Landry to be starters, Higgins and Peoples-Jones to be behind them, as well as Kadarius Hodge. But they also have Taywan Taylor, Damian Ratley, Jamon Moore, DJ Montgomery, JoJo Nansen, and a couple of those UDFAs as well. Minnesota with Stefanski last season only used 3 or more receivers on a play 19% of the time. And that's going to leave, a lot of playing times for these guys to be left out, especially when you have guys like Landry and OBJ. I know some of these guys are going to be used in special teams, but who do you see really being the odd man out here?
To be honest, it doesn't really matter to me. And I know that's not really answering your question, but I think the thing that keeps going through my head as you're asking me that question is, man, I'm glad that it's not going to be 2 of those guys. It's just going to, like 2 of those guys aren't going to make the roster. It's just going to be 1 of those guys. And I think that's what, again, signing Higgins allows you to do. And then obviously you're going to keep Donovan Peoples-Jones, right? So instead of having 2 of those guys, you only have 1. Montgomery last year kind of got sold short clearly with the injury, was picking up a lot of steam and was making a lot of plays on a lot of accounts during training camp. So he's a guy that, may have a shot, and I might like to see kind of make the squad. JoJo Natson was brought on clearly for special teams. He's going to compete with Peoples-Jones. Super fast guy. Would be great if we can find a way to sneak him on the team. Obviously availability is my biggest concern with him. And, besides that, none of those other guys really, stand out to me. Maybe Kadarius Hodge because, he's a good special teamer, so he may have a good shot. Actually, he's a really good special teamer now that I'm thinking twice about that. So he may have a really good shot of making the roster. But amending my original statement, besides that, it doesn't really matter to me from there on out.
It's a good problem to have, right? When you have, the heavy top talent with Odell, Landry, then you kind of have the next tier with Higgins and a couple others. It kind of don't have to worry about who the 6th, 7th guy is going to be on the roster in terms of receiver. And it's a nice problem to have because I know, in years past, guys like, and not to discredit them at all, but DJ Montgomery and Jamon Moore, those guys might be 2 and 3 on the team in terms of talent. And it's just nice for us to kind of have so much that we're worrying about those guys and not necessarily who the 1 through 4 or 5 is going to be.
Correct.
And to me, I think the other thing that could play into this as well is that, they do have other guys who you can utilize in the slot and outside as well. And I think one guy who really fits into that is Kareem Hunt. I think the limited role that they used him last year in motion, I think that really serves best, especially to keep defenses honest. And I'm kind of hoping that Stefanski kind of utilizes him in that same role this year, because I thought that at least the one thing Freddie did for a few plays correctly, at least in my estimation, was getting him in motion and really keeping those defenses honest. And I think that when you factor in those other wide receivers as well, Kareem Hunt's going to fit into that playing time.
Yeah, that's an interesting wrinkle that, to be honest, I hadn't really thought much about, is putting him out there in the slot. I know I value what he'll be able to do on passing downs, especially on play action passing downs, engaging him in the blocking game. I know he's going to have a tremendous value there. Obviously, as a running back, he's got talent, but yeah, I mean, he's a great pass catcher, and he does show the ability to run good routes. So that may give some of that flexibility and some of that being multiple that we've talked about, and we hear Coach Stefanski talking about a lot. I think that that thought isn't too far off from something that we might see on Sundays.
And in terms of being flexible, you have guys like Njoku and Austin Hooper who can both line up in the slot, do different things. And I know we just picked up Njoku's fifth-year option, so I'm going to touch on him a little bit more here. But I feel like he's somebody, especially in the red zone, who can line up outside, get those mismatches, and be that premier red zone target, because for some reason he's able to catch those contested balls better than the ones that are like right in front of him while he's running around. I don't get it, but some guys are just like that. But I feel like his contested catch ability is something that they need to really play to his strengths, especially in the red zone.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things about Njoku. First of all, I'm a big fan of Njoku, and I want to be clear on that. And I know a lot of people expect a lot out of him, given that he was a first-round draft pick. I mean, the dude is young, and he still is young. And in the 2018 season, the first half was bad in terms of drops. It was bad. But as that season continued and as it finished, he made a marked improvement, a drastic improvement in his drop rate. And along the way, he continued to stack up big plays, whether that was in the red zone, excuse me, whether that was in the red zone or, wherever it was in the field. A couple big plays in that Baltimore game, I think towards the end of the season, if not the last game as well. So I'm a big fan of Njoku. It takes tight ends 2 to 3 years on that runway to really take off in the NFL, unless you're a premier first-round tight end. It's a difficult transition. There's just a lot to soak up and soak in. So, I think he is going to be not just used like you had mentioned. I think he can be used all over. I think you can use him outside. I think you can use him inside. And I think you're going to see him be used in line as well. When I went back, and as I've gone back last year, I wrote an article, a film room on Njoku before this season, actually. I noticed that a lot of his plays where he was able to amass, big yards after catch or just make a big play for a first down or whatever it was, he starts in line, chips a little bit, and then releases up the seam or releases on a crosser or whatever it is. So I think we might be able to expect that same type of usage, or at least him to excel in that same type of usage in 2020 in this offense. So, you're certainly going to see him used in the red zone. He does thrive there. He's got the ability to jump up and again, use his elite athletic traits and elite size to just box out guys in the end zone. So you're going to continue to see that. That's certainly going to be a focus, I would hope anyways. But yeah, I think you can use him all over, and I think you can use Hooper all over. So you get guys on the field like that you can align and move around, that the defense, number one, doesn't really know what's coming in terms of alignment. And then number two, and we saw this comment following Coach Stefanski's press conference after the selection of Harrison Bryant. But, if you are able to keep 2 or 3 tight ends on the field at all times, especially in tempo, you can dictate what defensive packages you're going to see. And again, if you've got guys that can move around while the defense really can't in terms of how they're covering you and what they're doing, it gives you an advantage. And so I look forward to seeing how we incorporate those factors with Njoku and Hooper on the field at the same time. But I think one summation I would say again is that Njoku we should expect to be used in line just as much as he's used outside.
You talked about using 2 or 3 tight ends there to dictate packages, and to me, I think one really fun one would be to use the 3 tight ends, Hooper, Njoku, and Harrison Bryant, or maybe it'd be Farrell Brown or whoever the third one's going to be, and then having Nick Chubb out there as well as Kareem Hunt. Tell me that's going to be a pass or run. You cannot dictate which one it's going to be if you have all 5 of those guys out there, because you have 3 really solid pass catchers in Njoku, Hooper, and Kareem Hunt. You have 2 guys who can dynamically run with the football. So there's really so many different options and flexibility there that you can get really creative.
Yeah, I'd love to go back and see how many times Stefanski used 23 personnel in Minnesota. I don't have that data on hand. I would think that would be an interesting package, not having any receivers on the field. But to your point, depending on, what personnel groupings you're looking at and just the trends of the team and the weaknesses, the tendencies that you're scouting and you're preparing for, it may be a package that, given again the versatility that we have on the roster, at least on paper, it could be something that we see, and it might be exciting. Again, like you said, we've got 2 dynamic running backs right now, and then a group of tight ends that can block or pass catch. And I think the battle for tight end 3, tight end 4, I was actually talking with Brendan about this earlier. I think that's going to be a real fun battle to watch in camp.
I just looked that up really quick. They only used it on 7 plays last year, the 23 personnel. So not wow. Often, but I can't speak to Minnesota's tight ends and receivers off the top of my head, but I would tend to think that the people that are here now, in terms of players, I think that those guys may be better suited if they wanted to run something like that. As we start to wrap up here, what were your thoughts on them picking up the Njoku's 5th-year option? Were you surprised? Were you kind of like, this is well expected? Because I know Barry and crew were very adamant throughout the offseason saying that he's in the long-term plans. But I think that when you look at the amount of money that's already being thrown at the tight end room with the signing of Austin Hooper, I was kind of surprised that they went ahead and did it and maybe not worked out like an extension and then kind of maybe include that in there as well. But are you surprised that they ended up picking up that 5th-year option?
I'm not. I think it was smart for them to do it. And I think this sort of overlaps with what we mentioned earlier in terms of how they handled Higgins. My guess is that they were pretty damn transparent with Njoku, meaning like, look, dude, like I just had mentioned, the runway for tight ends is a couple years. We know you're young. We know you're talented. We know you came into the NFL super raw. We saw the progress you made down the stretch in 2018. We saw you improve your drops. We saw what you can do when you're playing at a higher level. Obviously, last year was unfortunate. So it's kind of like you're at this point where we want you, and we know that you can be a certain player that we need you to be. But again, essentially, you've got to go out and prove it. So we're going to invest this in you. We're going to bring you back for this extra year on your contract, and we want you to prove it because we do have a place for you on this team. But again, you have to earn it. So I think it's kind of one of those situations where there was probably a real clear conversation that was had, some real clear expectations that were laid out, and the talent that he possesses, it just makes sense to shore that up, in my estimation anyways. I'm not a contract guy by any means. So I just think it, again, made sense for them to do so. And my guess is that Njoku knows exactly what is expected of him this year.
And let's be completely honest here. If they wanted to move him, there really is no trade value there at all. So, there really isn't anything else they could do besides release him to where I would think that they would be able to get any kind of value. And I think, with him still being on his rookie deal, then having his $6 million option for next year, if he's able to build up that value a little bit more, maybe he's one of the sacrifices down the road. But obviously that's still yet to be determined. So there's just no value for him right now if they were to try to move him.
Yeah, I guess if you want to say there's a risk financially that they took, I mean, this is kind of it, right? They're betting on it and they're hoping that it comes through. They're going to pay for it one way or another, but they have that wiggle room in their contract, in their cap to do so. So, yeah, I mean, they're betting on it to happen. So let's just wait and see what happens on Sundays.
Yeah, and with somebody, we've used the term flexibility a lot today. For somebody that does have flexibility and can fit in the offense along with everybody else, if the goal is to go and win a Super Bowl in the next few years, taking that financial risk, so be it. That's perfectly fine. And whenever you're kind of at that point or almost to that point of making the playoffs, taking those kind of risks are well worth it to have those kind of playmakers on the roster. Well, Mike, this was the first time we actually got to talk on the podcast. I know we kind of chatted during the draft. I want to say that was on Friday night a little bit. It was great to have you on. And if you want to go ahead and plug where everybody can find you on Twitter, where everybody can read you, where everybody can listen to your podcast, you have the open floor.
Hey, man. Thanks, Anthony. Or as we say out here in Hawaii, mahalo nui loa. You can find me at Hawaii Browns Hui on Twitter. You can also follow our podcast at NBT Dogs Pod. So that's Nothing But the Dogs podcast. That's where me, Josh, and John chop it up with guests and talk about all the fun that is Browns football. Outside of that, I still do contribute at Dogs by Nature. That's where I started my roots outside of my time at the OBR. So, yeah, that's where you can find it. Anytime I write, that's where I'll be. And, yeah, man, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. This has been a good, fun talk about some of the relevant, current, not draft, well, somewhat draft, but not totally draft-related Browns topics.
Yeah, it's nice to get these kind of news items during the week. And I know this kind of, after the draft is when things kind of slowed down a little bit. So, last couple of days, we got a couple different news items to where, they deserve to be talked about. And I'm glad that you're able to join me tonight. And as always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at The Dogland. Be sure to follow me on Twitter as well, and Anthony Joki. You can find a podcast every platform out there. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the pod. We'd absolutely appreciate it. Check out our work over at thedogland.com. We had a lot of draft coverage over there, as well as Jack just wrote a piece on Rashard Higgins as well that we should mention as too. So be sure to check that out. With all that, we're going to get on out of here. And most importantly, go Browns.